Facebook has reportedly given special counsel Robert Mueller detailed records of Russian ad purchases from the 2016 presidential campaign. Those records go into further detail than what Facebook has shared with Congress. The news was first reported by the Wall Street Journal. The records include copies of the ads, details about the accounts that purchased them, and the criteria used to target ads to certain Facebook users. Renato Mariotti, a former federal prosecutor, wrote this on Twitter after the story broke, quote, "News that Mueller obtained a search warrant for Facebook content may be the biggest news in the case since the Manafort raid." He's talking about Paul Manafort, Mr. Trump's former campaign chairman. Agents searched his home in a raid this summer that reportedly lasted 10 hours. Renato Mariotti is with me now from Chicago. Renato, explain how this could signal a turning point in Mueller's investigation.
So up until now, what we knew Mueller was looking at were actually fairly narrow, specific crimes. Things like false disclosures on forms that Mr. Manafort or Michael Flynn made, or Jared Kushner. Things like obstruction as to the firing of James Comey. For the first time here, what we've learned, assuming that the Wall Street Journal's report about a search warrant is correct, is that Bob Mueller went to a federal judge and presented evidence and convinced that judge that a crime was committed involving foreign individuals contributing to a political election here in the United States through their actions on Facebook. It indicates that he's closing in on charging foreign individuals in connection with that, which is much more like the sort of thing I think a lot of people speculated could come from the Mueller investigation, but frankly we hadn't seen up until now. It also creates potential liability for people in the United States. If an associate of the president's worked with a Russian to further these efforts, for example, if somebody knew about the Russian operation and helped to succeed, they could also be criminally liable.
Well, the Wall Street Journal said Bob Mueller obtained this information with a warrant. What sort of evidence would have been necessary to secure that warrant?
So they would have to prove to a judge two things. Mueller would have to prove that there was good reason to believe that a crime occurred, and in this context, the crime would be making a foreigner making contributions in the course of a federal election. And then he would also have to show that evidence of that crime existed on Facebook. So he would have to sort of lay out evidence showing that this crime had occurred, not just merely say so, but actually, records that he'd obtained, testimony that had been given, or interviews that people gave to the FBI that proved to this judge that there was a good reason to believe that occurred. It's a very serious and significant move forward for the Mueller investigation.
Well, we touched on this. We know a focus of Bob Mueller's investigation is whether Trump campaign associates colluded with Russian officials during the election. What significance does that development have in that line of inquiry?
Well, when the media uses the word collude, what I take that to mean as a lawyer and as a former prosecutor is two people working together to commit a crime. And in this case, it would be a Russian operative, for example, and somebody in a Trump associate, essentially, is what I think we're talking about. And in that, if that's what we mean by collusion, because that word doesn't really have a legal meaning, then I think this is very significant. Because until now, the crimes that I talked about earlier, like, the false disclosure form or tax issues, those are all just kind of what I'll call discrete crimes. They're narrow crimes that really don't involve Russians and Americans working together. Here, a Russian operation to influence the election, if he's pursuing criminal charges on that, which is what this suggests, then that means he's looking to charge Russian individuals. And so for the first time, we're seeing the potential that a Russian name and an American name, someone who's associated with the Trump campaign, could appear in the same indictment. And I think that's really big news.
Well, and Renato, can you give us some sense from your experience of how often Facebook works with law enforcement and what sort of information it might share?
So law enforcement goes to Facebook on a fairly regular basis. It's a pretty common thing. I obtained search warrants on Facebook accounts myself. And there are a variety of other tools that you can also use to obtain information from Facebook. You can use subpoenas. You can use what's called a 2703 order, which also requires an affidavit and a court approval, but it has a lower standard. So the fact that the Wall Street Journal and CNN said that this was a search warrant was important because it's that higher standard that a judge would have to find. And essentially, what I would say is Facebook's attitude towards law enforcement is aggressive. They kind of have a reputation within law enforcement for being less cooperative and only giving information when they receive court orders and being sticklers about that. So, you know, the news in those reports, the Wall Street Journal and CNN reports, surprised me because they're such big news. But certainly, you know, the fact that Facebook would require a court order doesn't surprise me at all.
All right, Renato Mariotti. Renato, thanks very much for your insight. Appreciate it.
Thank you.